Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have a different sort of video for you, but one that I thought would be fun, which is talking about adaptations, but not film or TV adaptations, but we are going to talk about some video game book adaptations. Some ones that I would like to see specifically. I'm a big fan of video games. I play them a lot and all of that kind of thing, and I always think a lot of times when I'm reading a book, I'm like, man, a video game of this would be really cool. So I want to talk a little bit about a few video games that I would like to see based on some fantasy books. Um, this isn't going to be a super in-depth I'm not going to go super deep into the different things that I like to see for each of these, but I just kind of want to pitch some ideas that I think would be cool, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on either some of my ideas, what you think of them, what you'd like to add to them, or things like that, or even some other ideas that you may have for other fantasy books that you would like to see get adapted. I think video games are kind of an underrated medium in a sense in terms of book adaptations, in the sense that there are some out there, but I feel like they don't get as much attention as the big movie or TV show adaptations. But there are some very popular and good video game adaptations of books. You have several Lord of the Rings games. You have Hogwarts Legacy based on Harry Potter. You have the Witcher video games, which I think really popularized the Witcher universe, just as much as something like the Netflix TV show did. Things like that. And I think that video games are a medium that should be more utilized in terms of fantasy adaptations, because I think there's a lot that can be done with them. So I'm just going to pitch some ideas that I have, and I hope that you enjoy them. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is, of course, a Lord of the Rings game that I think would be really cool. I want to try to vary all of these, so my ideal Lord of the Rings game is like an open world RPG type of thing in the vein of the Elder Scrolls, but that's not what I'm going to talk about in this video. Instead, I want to talk about something different because I have another series that I would like an RPG about, and considering that we've gotten some semi-open world RPGs in Lord of the Rings, I want to go with something different. So I want to instead talk about a farming type of game, or like a kind of a cozy, calmer type of game set in the Shire. Some of these games I don't have a lot of experience with the genres, and this one is included in that, but I think that a game of this style would fit really well with not only the Lord of the Rings theme, but especially in the Shire. So with this, I'm thinking something kind of, where you can do some farming, where you can interact with other people in the town, doing different events, things like that. Just something kind of low stress, kind of relaxing. I'm thinking a game kind of in the vein of something like maybe Stardew Valley or even Animal Crossing, things like that, that are just kind of cozy, relaxing sort of games. I think that would fit the Shire really, really nicely. And it's a sort of a game that, as far as I'm aware, hasn't really been done yet, but I think is something that would work really well. I think you could, a lot of Lord of the Rings games are very big, high budget, high, production value type of things. Whereas this, I think, you could do something a bit lower budget, something smaller scale, but something that would still sell really well. And so that's part of the reason why I picked it. The next thing that I have is the open world RPG that I wanted to talk about, which is an adaptation of the Chronicles of Narnia. Now, Narnia has been a little bit forgotten when it comes to adaptations in the video game space compared to something like Lord of the Rings. The only adaptations that I can think of Narnia in terms of video games is the video game tie-ins, of which there were tie-ins for the first two movies that came out in the 2000s. I don't believe any video game ever came out for the third. Those are really the only game adaptations of Narnia, and I think that is a shame because I think that this series could really use an adaptation like this. Narnia is a series that is very near and dear to my heart, so I would love to be able to fully explore its world in an RPG. I think that something like this might be a little difficult to do because things like fighting and battles are not hugely important in Narnia. There are some important battles, of course, but I think that combat, is a very important part of a lot of video games, including RPGs. And so I feel like that might be a little harder to implement depending on what the story is. But I think Narnia would be a great setting for being able to build your own character and do different missions and quests, work for the Narnian kingdom, things like that. As far as time period, I'm not sure really when this could be set. Maybe it could be set during the golden age of Narnia, so then you could include some of the book characters like the Pevensies, things like that. And I would love to be able to fully explore Narnia, but of course that might be a bit too ambitious. So maybe just setting it to just the country of Narnia, rather than expanding into things like Archenland and Cowerman, things like that. Even though I'd love to be able to do that, I think for the sake of having a manageable scope for a project like this, I think just the country of Narnia would be totally sufficient. Could include a lot of iconic locations, could, I think, come up with a really cool storyline where you are involved with the Narnian kingdom, and they're doing some kind of thing. Maybe it's some kind of skirmishes with one of the other countries or some other thing that's going on. I think there could be a lot of room for something like that. Something like this would definitely probably have to be non-canon to the books, kind of similar to some of the Lord of the Rings games that have happened. But I think it would still be a lot of fun and would be something that I'd really like to see. And honestly, this one for me is just, I want to be able to explore Narnia in a video game because I think that would have a lot of potential. And it's something that I would really like to do. The next one that I have to talk about is a Brandon Sanderson adaptation. I have to include one of his things in this video. He's my favorite author, and I love the Cosmere, so I gotta include something here. You would think I would talk about a Stormlight Archive RPG, but since I already talked about Narnia, I am not going to do that, even though this is kind of also an RPG. But I would like to see a Mistborn action RPG, specifically set in Era 2 of Mistborn. Now, I think that Era 1 would perhaps be the more obvious pick, because it is, I would say, more iconic. The setting of Mistborn Era 1, I think, is more iconic than the setting of Mistborn Era 2, and Era 1 has also, as far as I'm aware, sold more. So people are more familiar with that, but I think that Era 2 would perhaps make the better game. Era 2, you have things like guns that you can use, so you could have this be kind of a third-person shooter, or even a first-person shooter, really. But I prefer third-person shooters personally, so let's go with that. But it could be either one, with some light RPG elements where you could be a Misting or a Twinborn or something like that, where you could, in terms of the RPG elements, select the type of character that you want to play, so you could have a set of different abilities depending on whether you are a Misting of different metals or things like that, or even a Twinborn. And you could have different abilities depending on which class, I guess, you choose, which would allow for a lot of replayability and would also allow for a lot of cool abilities, and things like that. And in terms of the RPG elements, you could like level up, get different abilities using these different powers, and really build an interesting character with that. And that could impact your gameplay, it could impact combat, it could impact traversal, which in terms of traversal, I find the traversal method of Mistborn really interesting that they use, especially in Era 1, kind of pushing and pulling on different metals in the world in order to basically fly. And I think that traversal in a lot of video games, for example, things like the Insomniac Spider-Man games or the Just Cause series is kind of those two are kind of similar to what I'm thinking in terms of traversal for this, for things that you could theoretically do something similar to. But I don't know how well that would work, but it could work. And then you could also have an open world type setting where you are able to explore the city of Ellendale and its surrounding areas. In terms of story, you could, again, this might have to be a non-canon thing, but you could maybe occupy a role similar to Wax in Era 2, where he's this kind of lawman, bounty hunter type figure. And you could do something similar to that and, fight criminals or things like that. And I think there's a lot of potential for something like this. You could have a lot of, obviously, lore and world building to discover. And since it takes place in Era 2, you'd have a lot of stuff to look back on in Era 1 and before that you could really get into in terms of lore and collectibles or things like that that a lot of people like to get into. So I think something like this has a lot of potential, and even though I think Era 1 might be the more obvious pick, I personally think Era 2 would make for a really cool video game. The next thing I have to talk about is a game based on A Song of Ice and Fire, also known as Game of Thrones because of the TV show. This is something that I think kind of already exists, but not quite in the form that I personally would want, and that is a grand strategy type of game. I think there is a sort of strategy game based on Game of Thrones that is out or has been out in the past. I don't know if it's like, I think it's like a browser-based game or a mobile game or something, but I'm thinking a full grand strategy in the vein of something like Civilization or Crusader Kings or things like that, where you can control a kingdom or at least part of a kingdom, control a character in a kingdom, things like that, or one of the different houses, and you know, participate in warfare, participate in politics. You know, Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire is a very politically driven series, and that's something that I tried to keep in mind with this as well, because I was thinking, you know, something like an RPG could be cool. You could include RPG elements in this too, but I'm thinking, you know, it is a very politically driven series, and I think grand strategy would work really well for something where you can make a lot of political decisions. And then obviously, you know, all these houses are kind of vying for power and things like that, so you could include that in it, and all kinds of different things. I think it would have a lot of potential for a video game. In terms of when it's set in the timeline, I think you could probably set it most anywhere, basically, and just you know, allow you to choose from the different houses, and just participate in this world and its politics and things like that. And again, might have to be a non-canon game, but I think you could still work with it anyway. And I think it would be really cool. The last thing that I have to talk about is actually a Discworld game. Now, this is the one that I think would be the hardest to get right, because Discworld, I think, lives and dies by its writing. And Discworld writing, I think, is is something that the writers of a game would have a really hard time nailing down. But if it could be done well, then I think this could be excellent. So I'm thinking a Discworld adventure game. Maybe like a point-and-click adventure game type of thing, which is not super duper popular these days. It used to be very popular back in the 90s and early 2000s, but I think that kind of style would work really well, and I think something like that might have already actually been done, but I think a new one would be really cool, and I think that an adventure game would work really well for something like Discworld. Obviously, adventure games, very story heavy, very dialogue heavy, and I think that the stories and the dialogue of Discworld are what really make it work, and the comedy and things like that. There would be a lot of opportunities for cool comedy, and interesting character stuff, interesting stories, and lots of wacky situations to get into. And I think that it could be a lot of fun. Now, again, like I said, the writing of Discworld, I think, is something that you would really have to nail in order to make something like this work. So out of everything on this list, this is the one thing that I think would be the hardest to actually get right. But if they were able to get it right, then I think it could be really cool and really successful, and something that I would really like to see. So that pretty much wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it's kind of a weird sort of video for me to do on the channel, but it's something that I thought about doing and something that I thought would be fun to talk about. And of course, you know, I'm very passionate about books. I'm very passionate about video games. So combining the two, I think, you know, just kind of makes sense to me. So let me know in the comments what you think of my ideas, if you have any other ideas that you would implement into them, or if you have any other series that you think would make for really cool adaptations. I'm sure there are plenty out there. I just stuck to series that I myself have read at least part of for this video, so I'm sure that other series would make for great video games. I would imagine something like Malazan would make for a great video game, for example, but I haven't read enough of it to really, you know, say for sure what would actually work. So let me know in the comments any other ideas you may have. I'm excited to hear your thoughts. So that is pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.